Thank you for being here at this interesting experiment of a mini conference. We have people from 3 continents here, as far flung as Scandinavia and New Zealand. The general idea with this was to put folks in conversation with each other who maybe wouldn't otherwise get to chat with each other about health lifestyles. Maybe because we're in different parts of the world, maybe it's because we have different methods or we study different aspects of it. And so we're hoping that this will be sort of an interesting conversational space with interesting talks, interesting panels, and a lot of chance for people to be able to speak up, come with questions, have things to say. I'm Steph Mulborn. I am a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and the Population Center at my university has funded this conference. So big thanks to the CU Population Center and to NICHD that funds the Population Center. So in the spirit of having this be a fairly open, informal, interesting dialogue for everyone, we're going to be keeping the chat open. And so, you know, feel free to sort of talk through things there as you go. For all of the different panels and talks, we will be recording them. So if you're more comfortable with your camera off, that's totally fine. Otherwise, it's nice to see your faces if it works out for you. And we are going to take questions at the end. Both people can put questions into the chat, or you can raise your hand. If you go down to reactions at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to click there and it'll say raise hand. You probably are noticing that we have a live transcript going, giving you subtitles at the bottom of your screen. Depending on your subscription level, you may be able to turn those off. And let's see, any other business things? Yes, the second part of today's session is going to be roundtables. We're calling them roundtables, but obviously we're not sitting there. But they're going to be breakout groups with people presenting their work in process. Some of the work is finished, some is work that's in early stages. And so we encourage you to join whichever of those groups you like. I'll be pasting into the chat at some point a reminder about what those roundtables are. They're also in the agenda that you received in email. If anybody didn't get that agenda or you'd like me to send it to you again, just pop me a private message in the chat and I'm happy to do that. I'd like to introduce the other 2 people who have been really instrumental in making this workshop happen. The first is Kim Trung Vu, who is a graduate student at CU Boulder. Kim, do you mind saying hi to everybody?
Good morning and good evening, everybody. Nice to meet you all.
And Kim is the most tech savvy person of our team. So if you run into any tech problems, Liz and I are happy to try to help, but Kim is probably going to be the person who's going to be able to help you the best. And then last but certainly not least, I'd like to turn things over to Professor Liz Lawrence from the University of Nevada at Las Vegas, who's going to be introducing our 2 plenary speakers and running things from here. Before we do that, I just wanted to say that the intellectual idea behind this conference is to think about the relationship between health lifestyles and social inequalities in multiple ways, from multiple angles, multiple methods, and disciplinary perspectives. And so sometimes you may be thinking about the ways in which social inequalities can shape people's health lifestyles and groups' health lifestyles, which is very important. Equally as important is the idea that people's and groups' health lifestyles can be something that can create and perpetuate inequalities. And so it's that reciprocal relationship that we've been thinking about in part when trying to come up with the sessions and the plenary talks. Having taken a sneak peek at Kate and Peter's slides, I'm really excited about the rest of this. And Liz, thank you so much, and please take it away.
Thanks so much, Steph. Hi, everybody. I'm Liz, if I don't know you, and I just want to say thanks everybody for all your support and enthusiasm. We're super excited for all of this, excited for the next couple of days and the conversations, but also excited that hopefully this is the beginning of collaboration and projects and new ideas and lots of things. So thanks everyone. And so I will introduce our first speaker, Dr. Catherine Frohlich. I'm going to try to keep it short. I saw something on the internet about don't do a long introduction. And sometimes it's hard because you admire someone and their work so much and you want to glow about it. But I will refrain from too much of that. So I'll say that Dr. Frohlich is full professor at the School of Public Health and the Department of Social and Preventive Medicine at the University of Montreal. She received her PhD in public health. She has numerous grants, articles, thousands of citations. And we've invited her today because her work is so fundamental to health lifestyles research. Over the last 20 or more years, her body of research has really helped us to understand these limitations of focusing on an individual understanding of health and health behaviors, and has really spurred greater attention to considering context, agency, social relationships, and health promotion. And some of you who are sociologists might be surprised to learn that her PhD is in public health and that she's in a school of public health because she's so brilliant at social theory and building these new theoretical ideas to understanding inequalities in health. I have a couple personal favorites of her papers. If anyone's looking for something to add to their syllabus, I particularly recommend the 2001 article about a theoretical proposal between for the relationship between context and disease. It's one of those papers that I just always keep coming back to. So please help me welcome Dr. Frohlich.
Thanks so much, Liz. I'm blushing. And thanks to Stephanie, Liz, and Kim for organizing this. I have to say, when I received the invitation, I was so excited for numerous reasons, but this whole area of research has been a focus of mine for 25, 30 years. And to have people celebrate it in this way is really, really exciting. So today I'm going to be speaking about the notion of collective lifestyles that I helped to develop, but really built on a number of people's work, including Bill Cockram, who has joined us today. I'm really excited about that. But also Hélène Corin and Thomas Abel, whose names will come up again and again over the course of my talk. So I want to start with a poem. This poem was, to be perfectly honest, I was rather obsessed with this poem as a child. And it's a simple Walt Whitman. I'm not a Walt Whitman fan in particular, but somehow I kept being drawn back to this particular poem. And the first stanza reads like this: "There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he or she looked upon, that object he became. And that object became part of him for the day, or certain part of the day, or for many years, or stretching cycle of years. Little did I know that at age 12, or whatever it was, this poem would impregnate everything that I tried to understand. That what we experience when we walk out the door shapes us, and we shape it, and not for a moment, but for days, years, months. It's our everyday experiences which shape what we become. And so this has really been very much a part of my program of research, my understanding of the world, and my desire to understand better how this all works. So as Liz so cogently said, I come from public health, and interestingly, both Peter and I draw on health promotion. So a lot of what shapes what I'm interested in are deep public health promotion questions, and I've used sociological theories in order to help me better understand how to potentially overcome some of the problems that we face in our practice of public health and health promotion every day. So why did I come to lifestyle from a public health perspective? And I'm going to bring up 4 issues that have driven my continued interest in lifestyle. These are not resolved by any means. The first is that most of the individual level behavioral interventions fail. So what we know from clinical encounters, for instance, is that it's very, very hard to teach people to change their behaviors, and for them to sustain that change. But perhaps even more importantly, in the 70s and 80s, when they set up the large Mr. Fitz or Comets, these very, very large studies that sought to change individual behavioral on a very large scale with large numbers of people, largely failed. Individuals, despite the sustained work that was given to them, in which they were engaged in, just were not able to change their behaviors. And it became, in a way, the failure of the individual. That's the first problem. The second problem is a central tenet of health promotion. And that is that health promotion is the process of enabling people to increase control over and to improve their health. This is our mantra. But how do we do this? This is the unresolved question in health promotion, and perhaps for those of you in sociology as well. The third issue was this malaise with the material behavioral dichotomy that comes from the Black Report. The Black Report came out of the UK at the end of the 70s, early 80s, and I have put forward that there's a great confusion that is the legacy of the Black Report. And this confusion is between the social structural and the individual more behavioral explanations for inequalities in health. In fact, there's been a sort of a rupture of those two, one from the other, and I try to bring them together in my notion of collective lifestyles. And finally, a little bit later on, more in the 90s, there was a renewed appreciation for aggregate collective levels, variables, and the role of the social environment in shaping behaviors and health outcomes. It sort of created a space for us to think about lifestyle a bit differently. So I'm going to start off my talk with the answer to my talk, and then I'll work backwards. My PhD supervisor used to say, why do you do this? But it's just the way I do. So I'm going to give you my answer, which is that both the structural causes of poor health and people's ability to change their behavior must be taken into consideration by researchers and policymakers if we desire people to be able to take control over and improve their health. So we'll come back to this at the end, but this is going to be the framing for what I'm going to walk you through. So how do we do this? How do we go beyond individual lifestyle models of intervention? So I'm going to propose to you that we need to examine the relationship between structural causes of behavior and understand the interplay between structure and agency, or going back to much older philosophical discussions about this tug of war between free will and determinism, or choices versus chances. We'll come back to this in a moment, but these are different ways of looking at the same object in using different disciplinary lenses, and I'll elaborate a little bit further. Secondly, an examination of the social structure underlines the role of power and leads to a discussion of the unequal nature of structures. This is fundamental to any concern about health lifestyles at a collective level, particularly with regard to inequities. There is this fundamental role of power that is often evacuated from discussions of lifestyle that needs to be inserted into our discussion. We'll come to this as well. And thirdly, an examination of agency gives power back to the individual and suggests that there are both opportunities and constraints to individuals in actualizing their agency. And I will elaborate on this further. So I'd like to return to the analytic concept of lifestyle for a moment. I presume you're all well aware of this, but I think it's worthy of just touching base for a moment on where this comes from. So the modern notion of lifestyle comes largely from American scholarship in the 1960s and 70s that focused on individual behavior. The backdrop of all of this was the result of the epidemiologic transition and the onset of risk factor epidemiology. So I think it's really important for us not to forget this. We bump up against this all the time, continually, and we have to cogently argue differently in order to move the discussion in a different direction. So I found it useful to return to some of the origins of the term lifestyle, most notably Max Weber, later Marcel Mauss, and Pierre Bourdieu. And for those of you who are really interested in the issue of lifestyle, I heavily suggest that you read particularly some of the writings of Marcel Mauss, who really was the teacher of Bourdieu. And you brought out some really, really interesting ideas about how lifestyle becomes embodied. One particular article about soldiers and how they walk is particularly good. So lifestyle, an analytic concept that distinguishes groups of people, a set of behaviors, practices. I see it as a group phenomenon. As I mentioned, Max Weber, Marcel Mauss, and Pierre Bourdieu see lifestyle as habitus. So this is really Bourdieu who spoke of habitus. Mauss did as well. But I see habitus as sort of the culmination of the movement from Weber to Bourdieu. And it's a means of social differentiation used to acquire or maintain a certain social status. Note the important power dynamics that's there. What Weber helps us understand or to conceptualize, and what I try to draw on and develop, is this essential distinction between what he called life choices, which he saw as self-direction, and life chances, the opportunity that people encounter due to their social situation. So again, and really these choices and chances were not separate from each other. They were in this reciprocal relationship that is so key to our understanding. Here a nod, of course, to my good friend and colleague Thomas Abel, who really has come up with this very useful definition of lifestyle for myself. Health behaviors comprise patterns of health-related behavior, values, and attitudes adapted by groups of individuals in response to their social, cultural, and economic environment. A really nice Whitman-esque way of thinking about lifestyles. So who did I find to help me think through how to move beyond a purely structuralist or purely agentic explanation of lifestyles? So I want to go to some of the theoretical origins of my own ideas in order to work through with you how it came about. So I first moved to, or took inspiration from Anthony Giddens, whose early work really helped me understand and work through that lifestyles should be understood as neither purely structuralist nor voluntarist, as he sought out configurations of social relations that move people to act in ways that produce the effects we observe. Practices, what we do, emerge from structure, reproduce structure, and can transform structure. So it's this idea of this reciprocity between structure and practices, which was so fundamental to my own thinking and so helpful in my understanding and bringing in agency. Because in Giddens' theoretical thinking, he introduces this idea that people are able to deploy a range of causal powers, which then can reshape or move the social structure. So this was really, really helpful for me in thinking about this relationship between choices and chances and trying to bring them into conversation one with the other. However, what Giddens was unable to do was to provide me with the analytic tools to understand how social inequities, and social inequities in health in particular, come out of this structure agency interplay. So Giddens is not particularly interested in issues of inequities. And so I moved to Pierre Bourdieu to help me try to add additional theoretical ideas to help me work through how some of this interplay could lead to inequitable outcomes. And I'm sure all of you are well versed in Bourdieu, but just to give you an idea of some of the aspects of Bourdieu that I take, and Peter will also be speaking to this later, I understand. So what was particularly helpful for me and what I drew on was Bourdieu's notion of habitus, a socialized body, a structured body, a system that is socially constituted of structured and structuring dispositions that are learned through practice. This habitus is this way of being in the world that comes about by interacting in the world, but is also very much shaped by our position. With the habitus, he makes the link between how social relations through power may ascribe certain lifestyles to particular groups of people and thus lead to inequalities. It's really important to highlight here that Bourdieu is fundamental to our understanding of how social inequities between groups come about and how they're reinforced over time. So this is really helpful in terms of understanding the origins of inequities and then how they're able to reproduce. So the habitus is really helpful but so are Bourdieu's notions of capitals. And I'm not going to walk you through this slide, but I myself took and have adapted in particular Bourdieu's notions of economic, social, and cultural capital. I dispel with symbolic capital. I'm hoping that Pedro will speak to this a little bit later, mostly because I found it almost impossible to operationalize, and that social, economic, and cultural capital were much closer to some of the ideas that were being developed in public health. So these three capitals were very helpful to me in helping me understand what those inequities might look like, what are their forms, and then how do they interact in order to create inequities. And Thomas Abel's slightly more recent work has been really helpful in this regard in terms of capital interaction. So again, giving a nod to my dear friend Thomas, he and I have worked through some of these ideas in thinking about how capital interaction can lead to health inequities. And this is a basic model that he's come up with in thinking about how these three capitals in their interaction lead to inequitable health relevant lifestyles, and in turn to inequitable health outcomes, both in terms of morbidity and mortality. So this brings us to the idea that lifestyles are not just individual. I think this is rather clear by now that when I speak about lifestyle, I'm not speaking about what Stephanie does as an individual, but what Stephanie, Liz, and Kim do as academics, as people who form a part of a social group. And this I termed collective lifestyles, giving a nod to my co-supervisor, Hélène Corin, an anthropologist here in Montreal, and also to Bill Cockram, who was fundamental in really bringing us to the point of understanding this notion of lifestyles as a collective entity. Collective lifestyles for me are not just the behaviors that people engage in, but fundamentally the relationship between people's social conditions and their social practices. They're the observable aspects of social context, observable through individuals' practices and relations. So social inequalities and collective lifestyles, where do the social inequalities, where did I move this issue? So at this point in my thinking, I came to, what is inequality exactly? It's inequality of what? And this brought me at this point to the issue of accessibility, and an issue that I'm still grappling with in my own work, particularly from a health geography perspective, actually. This issue of accessibility in terms of constraints and opportunities when resources are accessible. And I can deconstruct that perhaps later in the discussion. So what has really driven a lot of my later work is how do contextual determinants influence inequalities in health, not just which contextual determinants influence health. So one of the fundamental problems I bumped up against is that for the same amount or quality of resources, different groups of people were not able to extract the goods from those resources in the same way to yield to similar health outcomes. So it wasn't just the quantity of resources, as perhaps Bourdieu would say, there was something else. And this brought me to scholarship on distributive justice. So what many of you may not know is that I actually did my undergraduate studies in political science, and so had a little foray into issues of distributive justice, which have very much marked me in my own work. So what theories of distributive justice strive to conceptualize is what a just society is in terms of its distribution of goods and resources. There are many currents of thought, but some of the main ones for the purposes of our discussion today are Rawlsian, utilitarian, and sense capability theory. So both Rawlsian and utilitarian perspectives on inequality proved problematic for me as they did not take into account individual or group inequities in ability to use the resources put at their disposal, or in utilitarian terms, based on resource distribution. And just by the way, almost all public health is based on utilitarian notions. Greatest good for greatest number. We're seeing it right now for the most part in terms of our response to the pandemic, although there's some interesting issues with regard to vulnerable populations that move beyond that, but that goes beyond the talk for today. So what brought me to Amartya Sen is that he takes this inequality into account by turning the lens towards what people are able to derive from goods. So what are people actually able to do with these goods in order to derive health and well-being outcomes? And I just want to walk you very briefly through some of the fundamental aspects of Amartya Sen's theory and invite you, if you're interested in reading further into his work, which is just brilliant, of course. So his capability theory is based on two fundamental issues, or two fundamental analytic tools, what he calls functionings, which represent the state of a person. So an example would be being nourished, and capabilities, which is the combinations of functionings that a person can achieve or considers her or himself able to achieve, the nutritional level that an individual extracts from the food supply. So what Sen leads us to think about is, what is it? Social inequality goes beyond the fact that some individuals possess more capitals than others, to go back to Bourdieu, but there is considerable social inequality in the chances and ability for people to have the three types of capital consistently support and complement each other, with the end result being a health advantage. In other words, using Sen's terminology, there are differential capabilities of groups of people to use these capitals for a health advantage. So the interaction of capitals and their transformation into health points towards a decisive function of agency. Individuals actively use their capitals to produce health. And this is an area that we do not understand particularly well, and that I invite the next generation to continue to try to understand. So again, drawing on some of Thomas's work, this is what schematically, what I've just described could look like. The relationship between capitals, capabilities, health inequalities, and collective, what I call collective lifestyles. On the left-hand side, the resources, the three capitals of Pierre Bourdieu. In the center, the capabilities of Sen, so the opportunities, chances, and choices for people to act to enhance health and well-being, and the functioning being collective lifestyles. This brings me to the end of my talk. So some concluding thoughts to sum this all up. Inequalities research focuses too much on the redistribution of primary goods rather than what people are able to do with these goods. And so it's really a plea to those of us here to think more cogently, more fulsomely about really what people are able to do with these goods in future research. We need to improve our understandings of the conditions that would permit people to better transform resources and capitals into improved health practices, collective lifestyles, and health. The notion of accessibility and social inequalities in health, people do not necessarily use resources in the ways that we expect. And there's a lot of really interesting work that can be done qualitative and quantitatively in order to help us better understand this space that we don't understand very well about how people use resources, why people don't use certain resources. Think about, for instance, why certain people don't want to be vaccinated currently, just a very really current example. And lastly, the collective lifestyles is a useful heuristic, I think, for understanding what brings about social inequalities in health. And I leave you with this fabulous last slide, which I've actually borrowed from Jenny Pape, a colleague from the UK, and which actually is a Banksy graffiti. Sorry, the lifestyle you ordered is currently out of stock, which just showed up on a wall somewhere in the UK sometime in 2011. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. My mind is buzzing with ideas already. If there's any clarifying questions, I think we're going to hold off on the deep theoretical questions until we've had a chance to hear both talks. And so thinking about the two of them together, but if there's any clarifying questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, raise a physical or virtual hand, or I'm used to no response because I teach on Zoom, so I will just plow ahead. So I'm super pleased to introduce Dr. Peter Kort for the next plenary talk. Dr. Kort is Associate Professor in the Department of Food and Nutrition and Sports Science at the University of Gothenburg. He received his degree in sociology. His work in health lifestyles has really examined the discourses around health promotion. And he's done so much work in helping us to understand this concept of healthy lifestyle and problematizing that concept as well. Dr. Kort's work has really been fundamental to our understanding of health lifestyles through his consideration of the role of power. That's something that I really appreciate and always am coming back to. And also through explaining how and why health lifestyles are ideological, just as much as maybe as they are about health. And if anyone's looking for something to add to their syllabus, the 2008 Health Sociology Review, The Symbolic Power of Healthy Lifestyles is one of my favorites. So please help me welcome Dr. Kort.
Thank you very much, Liz, for this very nice presentation, and I'm very happy to be able to do this speak for all of you. And I think it's also a great opportunity to have this conference about health lifestyle research, and not least considering the situation we're in with the pandemic and the challenges we meet with that. Yeah, I will try to add something after Kate's wonderful talk, and she guided you through basic, or not only basic, a lot of sociology and sociological theory, and so I don't have to do that too much, I suppose. I did do some research about health lifestyles, and I've done other research relating to this area. And I am working within the field of health promotion as a sociologist. And so my talk will focus on health lifestyle issues related to health promotion predominantly. And yeah, power and what we actually mean with talking about health lifestyles or healthy lifestyles is what I will talk about today. Right, oh, wait a minute. Here we go. A bit about my background. I came into health promotion from outside. I was a PhD student in sociology at the University of Gothenburg many years ago, doing a PhD in sociology of education. And then I got an opportunity to get a job as a lecturer at a smaller university north of Gothenburg, and they were talking about health, public health and health promotion. And this was 1996. It was 10 years after the Ottawa Charter, and this was still a new idea, a new frame of reference for working, thinking health and how to improve people's health. Also about questions of health inequities and opportunities to change that. What I've done is that I did a PhD. I actually changed my subject and started to writing. You should never do that, but I did. So I started writing a PhD on health promotion, and I tried to understand health promotion as an idea, as an ideology, and I did a PhD that tried to follow how health promotion was institutionalized in the Swedish context. It's in Swedish, I'm afraid, the PhD, but still, I made an attempt. And doing that, I did, among other things, and I did a discourse analysis of health promotion and tried to understand what is the basic ideas of health promotion. What is health promotion? What are they talking about? And I started as an outsider, and then I kept working within health promotion. So over the years, I've become more of an insider, I suppose, and is nowadays I'm part of the health promotion researchers community. And that's nice in many ways, also challenging. And I've done other discourse analytical studies, and health lifestyles, and the question of lifestyle is there all the time when you do that. If you look at health promotion or issues related to health education, you will come across issues related to behaviors and lifestyles. And then I've also been part of different health promotion intervention research projects, and also health promotion interventions where there's not been really much research, but there's been interventions where they wanted a researcher as part of an advisory board. So I've been part of that as well. And then again, this question of how should we do health promotion, and what is it actually that we're trying to do when we do health promotion is like center stage. Which leads me to the same definition that Kate just had, the standard definition of health promotion, and the italics are mine, which is saying that health promotion is the process of enabling people to increase control over and to improve their health. And that's nice, I like it. It's very much an empowerment definition, because this is the way that empowerment was defined, not with health, but control over their lives in the early 1980s. So this is saying that we want to empower people to increase control over their health. This is what we want to do. And it's open for a lot of interpretations, of course. But there's another definition that I always use when I teach health promotion. And this is from Michael O'Donnell, who wrote this also 1986 in the American Journal of Health Promotion, saying that health promotion is the science and art of helping people change their lifestyle to move toward a state of optimal health. And for me, this is another way of understanding what health promotion is about. It's about helping people change their lifestyle from implicitly saying that they need to change their lifestyle. And this is something else than saying that we should enable people to increase control over their health in order to change their health in a way that they think is relevant for them. So this is something that I think haunts health promotion, that we tend to say that we want to do according to the first definition, and we tend to do according to the second. We try to change behaviors, and that is the same thing that Kate just said, but and I will talk about this from perhaps a bit different perspective, though. So the challenge that I see in this is that lifestyle as such is a challenging concept. And we tend to be stuck, and I'm talking about health promotion predominantly, in an understanding of lifestyle as consciously chosen individual behaviors, and individual behavior change then becomes the dominant health promotion strategy. And with stuck, I mean that what I've seen and what I've been doing as well in terms of research about health promotion, this is where we're at, and this is where we kind of end up in most of the interventions and projects that are trying to do health promotion. Even if we try to do differently, this is what we do. And this is also being self-critical as part of the researchers that have been doing health promotion intervention research, trying to do something more, something different, trying to work with health from other perspectives. This tends to be where we land. There's also a problem, I think, with what I would call a pull yourself together morale that also haunts health promotion, that we tend to tell people that you can, if you really want to, or if you're really motivated, you can change your behaviors to be more healthy. And there's also consequently very strong focus on expert and evidence-based knowledge, despite a strong empowerment discourse within health promotion. And this has been studied. I know that Irving Ruthman once wrote that if there's one common denominator within health promotion, it's empowerment. Everyone talks about empowerment. We mean very different things, but my understanding of empowerment relates to trying to help people to understand health and work towards better control of their health. But we tend to want to make people do the right thing. And that is part of the challenge and problem that I see with health promotion practice as it is today. So then along the way, somewhere doing my PhD, I came across health lifestyle research, which was very comforting and nice. I liked that as a sociologist because there's a lot of sociologists and others doing this kind of research. And Bill Cockerham talks about the individualist paradigm within health lifestyle research, which I think is a very good conceptualization of this. And so this sociological informed theorizing has challenged this individualist paradigm that we've been talking about, and focusing on life chances and socioeconomic resources in shaping health-related behaviors. And this is Thomas Abel and Bill, and also you could add Kate Frohlich and others to this as well, of course. And I was very keen on and read a lot of Pierre Bourdieu when I was a student in sociology. So I also very much enjoyed that this new way of theorizing, or new way, but this way of theorizing lifestyle, health lifestyles often took stand within the writings of Pierre Bourdieu, and among other things, his concept of habitus. Yeah, and from my side, what I might add to this, or I think that I hopefully have added to the discussion, is while recognizing the importance of this work, I claim that the part of relational analysis, which is central concern in the work of Bourdieu, is missing and would need to be added, I think, or at least taken into consideration in thinking about health lifestyles, and also thinking about how we should preferably do health promotion in a way that actually considers some basic fundamentals when it comes to dealing with health inequalities. And this is a quote that I think kind of summarizes a lot of the things that I will try to spell out. The possession of greater material and cultural resources by people of higher social status enables them to label their preferred forms of consumption and lifestyle as desirable and legitimate, thus conveying messages about superior taste and social distinction. Symbolic rather than material forms of inequality are implicated here, which with consequences for the psychological well-being of disadvantaged people. Yeah, and this is a number of British researchers behind this. So I was going to just briefly walk through to talk about Bourdieu, and not the most common concepts of habitus and capital. I will talk about capital and habitus, but I will definitely talk about the concept of field and the idea of field that Bourdieu got. And this is taken from Bourdieu's original work, translated to English, illustrating, I just need to get you off my, okay, here we are. Illustrating the idea of the social field, as he talks about, and field as such is defined in different ways, but this is a definition from a Swedish researcher saying that the field is a system of relations between positions occupied by agents and institutions that dispute something common to them. So, and I will show you in a minute what this means. And the actors in the field have certain common interests that they fight for, that they find valuable. And the actors of a field also defend the field from external threats. And the fiercest battles are fought between the established players and the newcomers. And the players in the field also tend to strive upwards. And then to be pedagogical, I just wanted to show that this is, of course, a basic way of symbolizing a social structure with people, or positions, I should say. Positions in the top with high volumes of capital, resources, And in the bottom, you have positions with low volumes of capital. And then there's a distinction made between, from Bourdieu's side, between cultural capital and economic capital. So on the left-hand side and the top, on the left-hand side, you have positions with high amounts of cultural capital, and then they've invested in higher education and done careers needing education and cultural resources. This does not mean, with this you don't get that much money out of it. The people with the money are on the other side with high amounts of economic capital and relatively low amounts of cultural capital. And in the bottom you have different groups, positions that have relatively low amounts of capital, but still have different positions depending on the total volume and composition of the capital. And then what Bourdieu did is that he pointed at the different occupations and professional groups and put them on this plane depending on what amounts of and what composition of capitals they have. So you have higher education teachers, that would be us, high up. In Sweden, I don't think we would be that high up, but still it's a good position to have. You have secondary teachers, you have public sector executives, and you have social and medical services. So this is the objective side of this picture of the social room of society as such. And in the bottom, you have foremen, you have semi-skilled, and skilled workers, and unskilled workers, and other groups with low amounts of capital. And also, this is occupations and positions that don't require a lot of education or any education, basically. So this is the field as such, and there are power relationships between the different positions. They relate to each other and they compete for the capitals and values that they find interesting and important to have. Yeah, so that's the field. And what I think is interesting and important is also Bourdieu's talk and writings about taste and distinction. And it's his main book, I would say, is the book called Social Judgement. No, I forgot that. It's called Distinction, a social critic of the judgment of taste, sorry, which was translated to English in 1984, I think, originally written in the late 1970s. So what he does here is that he says that, well, we have the positions and the circumstances that they come with leads to different preferences and social actions, and the preferences and social actions tend to coincide then with different social classes. And the culture that fits within a social class defines what is considered good or bad, nice or ugly, right or wrong, healthy and unhealthy. That's a lot of norms and values are related to the position you have. So people in different positions tend to have different ideas of what's good, what's bad, what's nice, what's ugly, what's right, what's wrong, what's healthy and unhealthy. And it's also the case that taste is a tool with which the dominant class, groups that have powerful positions, marks distance to other classes or other groups. And the different classes position themselves in relation to each other, of course. And then habitus, again, is, and I like this definition of habitus, it's the feel for the game that you're in, because Bourdieu considers the relationships between different classes and social groups in society as a game where you fight and strive for resources that you find valuable, and you compete for those resources with others. So it's the feel for the game and the ability to play by the rules of a specific field, the rules of the social field you're in. So those groups up here, they have specific rules for their game. They compete pretty much for the same type of resources, which is a lot of cultural goods that they tend to produce. And groups further down compete for other things and have power relationships based on that. And then what Bourdieu does in this picture, in this model, is that he puts in the tastes and the preferences, cultural preferences of the groups, the social classes, the professional groups, occupational groups that he defines. So people up here, we tend to like chess, he says. We like mountains, swimming and mineral water and hiking and cycling holidays. So this is things that we tend to, people in our type of position tends to enjoy and like and want to do and think considers to be valuable and good things to do. While people in positions in the lower end prefer other things, beer, fishing, belote, which is a French card game I've learned, and football, which is soccer in an American language. For instance. So there are objective positions of occupations and professions, and then you have the taste and preferences of those groups that have a relatively independence. So the tastes will change and move around. So in Sweden, a lot of people started playing golf, and the golf became a popular sport. And then the value of golf, of course, decreased, because if it's not a practice, something that you do that has a high value because everyone does it, then, well, the value of golf as a marker of a way to make a distinction for your position will fall down, at least to some extent. So this is the logic behind Bourdieu's field theory and his discussion about taste and distinction. Right, so far so good. So now I thought I would introduce you to a few personal slides, actually, because making this more to try to describe what this is. This is my university, Gothenburg University in Gothenburg, in the Vasaparken, the Vasa Park. Vasa was a king of Sweden many years ago, but here it is. This is where I have my position as a researcher and teacher, and this is pretty much what I often do, and I suppose that most of you do often. You teach students, you stand in front of people looking at you, and if not that, we probably sit by desks writing, and nowadays we could stay at home with our cats or whatever we have. We don't have a cat, but still we can work from home. And in Sweden, there's also been a debate about the fact that the norm tends to be that you should work from home, because it's kind of implicit that most people can work from home. But yeah, we can, and we also have control over a lot of things during work time. When we come and when we go, and how we manage our everyday job. So this is me. This is my position, and it's a very good position in many ways. It's stressful, but it pays relatively well. Maybe you shouldn't say that, but I think it does. And then I found a Facebook group, or I was invited to a Facebook group from the small town where I come from in another part of Sweden, and they have in that Facebook group, a man is managing it, and he publishes a lot of pictures from this small town, and a lot of pictures from the industry where my father worked way back. And this is pictures from the 1970s. This is what he did. It's not him, it's a colleague of his doing spray painting. They constructed building equipments of different sorts. This is another picture, and this is actually my father with a mask. I don't think he ever used it, or they did eventually, I suppose, but this is a kind of show. I never seen these pictures before, so I actually found them just a few months ago, And when we saw this picture, we thought that, geez, that's my father, me and my sister. And this is the system that they had to manage in order to get a job. You have a card and you stamp at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you put it on the other side. And when you go home at 4 o'clock, you put it in again, and then you put it back. So 7 to 4 is the way that those guys work. And if you wonder what it says on the sign, I suppose you can guess. It says, "Don't spit on the floor." This is just to highlight, this is different ways, this is different realities, this is different circumstances, as so often is talked about, for life and for everyday job and work. And this leads, according to Bourdieu, to different interests and tastes. And people like me, we tend to enjoy mountain biking, and I do too. And I have the economy to buy the quite expensive mountain bikes you need to have in order to do this. And we like nice, healthy food, green vegetables, wine. We have good meals, and we tend to perhaps read books. While people in the position of what my father used to have, he's not living anymore, he passed away a few years back, is football again. It's eating meals that, this is the traditional Swedish meatballs with potatoes, brown sauce, and some lingonberry sauce. There's not a vegetable in sight. And he didn't like vegetables. And people that I know from this kind of position don't like vegetables, and they don't want to eat them. And he did like this kind of TV show that was very, very popular in Sweden a few years back, where you could buy lottery tickets, and on Saturday night you watched this and you could win things. You could win money, you could win stuff. And he watched television a lot. He watched shows on like this, and he also watched sports and liked to watch sport. And this is a working class sport in Sweden. This is a working class program. This is working class food. This is my and our world, I suppose, with totally different preferences. And this is kind of what Bourdieu is pointing at in his research, the different tastes, the different preferences when it comes to preferences that people from different positions with different circumstances tend to have. Oh gee, time is running. So back to the question, or the title of my speak, Why Health Lifestyle Discourse Reinforces Health Inequalities. I'd say that healthy lifestyle, as with any other lifestyle, symbolizes resources connected to specific social conditions. You need time and energy to go to the gym after a full day's work, and you need money to pay for the fee and the equipment you need. And a healthy lifestyle is also a representation of the dominant tastes and preferences in a specific field in which it's produced, and has a symbolic power that enables symbolic violence. And this is hard words that Bourdieu used, symbolic power and symbolic violence, which those lifestyles tend to put for groups that do not have access to the field in question. When this specific lifestyle of the dominant, culturally dominant people, groups in society is presented as the healthy way of living. So as I see it, that in the way that habitus and lifestyle are presented by Bourdieu, the concepts become part of an analysis that has focus on how, by whom, and for what purposes the representations of healthy are produced, rather than on the possibilities of different social groups to attain a ready-made healthy lifestyle. So I always when I think of and talk about and health, the concept of health, it's always a matter of like, yeah, what kind of health? What does that actually mean in this context? And I think it's important to specify that. So this is some kind of thought relating to this. Therefore, lower socioeconomic classes tend to be impeded in their possible engagement with what is more widely considered to be a healthy lifestyle due to the various capital-related constraints. Consequently, people in low socioeconomic positions are liable to feeling that that popularly promoted physical activities are not for people like them, that people like them would not, as well as could not explicitly live in this way. To sum up, so a healthy lifestyle is always a construction that is produced in and represents a specific class position in society. People in most need of health tend not to have the capital in terms of money, equipment, clothes, bodies, postures, education, language needed to enter the fields where healthy lifestyles are produced. They lack capital and they lack the right habitus. And regarding symbolic capital, as I understand from Bourdieu's position, symbolic capital is any kind of asset that people in a specific field consider to be valuable and worthwhile fighting for. And that might be, the bottom line for him is cultural and economic resources, but it could be anything, basically, that people consider valuable and important. And bodily postures, to be able to have a posture, to move your body, to express your body in a way that is confident and positive, is a capital among people in our position in society. Because I often think of what I look like and how I move. And so when I teach, which I don't do now, but when I stand in front of students, because, and this is something that Bourdieu talked a lot about, the fact that people in higher social positions are looked upon, are using the body and their expressions and their looks as part of their tool in their everyday job. So, and the assessment of the lack of relevant capital and the unfit habitus among lower social positions is made by the wealthy in the center of these fields that the idea of the healthy lifestyle is produced. So they define the rules of healthy living and the way of being displays the healthy lifestyle. And this is us researchers and health promotion professionals. We're part of that field. We have a very specific idea what a healthy lifestyle is and what it looks like. And that's the idea that we tend to find valuable and the way that we want health to be represented. So when confronted with the healthy lifestyle, the unfit and poor can only be embarrassed and feel guilt for the lack of all that which is needed to be healthy. Yeah, this is again another quote: being oriented around control and restraint, the dispositions of the cultural dominant lead the bearers to define the dispositions of the dominated, the negative foil in terms of lack of control, lack of restraint, lack of forethought, or in a word, of excess. As if less lean or ethical diets were simply bad choices made by autonomous or stupid people rather than the product of here and now practical orientation attuned to the harder conditions of life and experience associated with less capital. This is a way again of expressing this kind of analysis that I think is very important and that Bourdieu brings to us. And this is the last slide. I tried to put down some conclusions from this. So discourses of healthy lifestyles that make representations of the good lives of the socially and culturally dominant groups the norm will continuously reproduce or even reinforce inequalities in health, I think. And such discourses stigmatize and discriminate rather than motivate and empower. And I'm managing a research project about obesity discourse and how the prevalent obesity discourses, in society today in Sweden and other societies around the world, what effect that discourse has for PE, physical education teachers, the way that they understand what they are going to do, what's important, how they view pupils, and how they teach physical education. Because this has been a debate in many countries around the world that pupils in school with big, heavy, unfit, not physically easily moved bodies tend to be stigmatized and discriminated. And this is based on discourses about, among other things, obesity in our society. So this kind of analysis, I think, could be applied not only to social class and inequalities related to that, but also in a broader sense. And I think that if anything, I think that participatory research, action research is needed in order to better understand the practical everyday challenges of enabling dominated groups in society to increase control over and to improve their health. Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think so many of the ideas I can insert lots of different things that are going on in society and apply those. So thanks so much. So I missed Jason, you had a question, and then other folks feel free to pop questions in the chat or raise hands. Jason?
Well, I'm glad I waited because my question was addressed almost head on with the second address. First of all, those were both fantastic presentations, and I'm a big fan of both of your respective work in this area. And for those who have heard me talk about this a lot and are already in attendance, can cover yours, but it's this notion of collective lifestyles that you're talking about it resonates very strongly as a resident of Boulder, Colorado, which I often make the case is an incredibly toxic environment in some ways, precisely because of that limiting capacity to understand or even experience difference of any kind in this environment that proposes itself to be so open to any type of difference. It's very challenging for people to experience it. And one way that it's very challenging is how people experience or present their health lifestyle. And if it's not in line with people, climbing a mountain or jumping off a cliff or riding a mountain bike or doing all those things, there's something uniquely wrong with that individual. There's something suspect. Who are they? They're not connected to us. They're not one of us. And a lot of people just get sick of it and they move out of this environment. And so to Kate, the way that you framed it, and getting back, and this is where I would ask your question is there, on your penultimate slide where you had you're explaining collective lifestyles, could that itself go back to opportunities, but rather than opportunities, incredibly limiting or constraining capacity in terms of, especially for people, again, who are not sort of publicly demonstrating that commitment to being one of us. And the one of us thing works great for a ton of people in Boulder, but for the people that it doesn't work for, it's toxic. And more importantly, I don't think it's just the adverse health of the individual. I think it affects the overall health of the community. So that toxicity, and I think that's exactly what Peter was talking about. And I'm wondering if rather than seeing these as different perspectives, could be seen as fundamentally the same, just including that difference in your initial framework. So there wasn't really a question in there, I don't think, more of a bunch of comments. And then also, Peter, you listed football and beer as though they were independent. And in the last 2 or 3 years, some rosés, I said it out loud, they're really good. Just say it. Just things change.
Yeah.
Peter, do you wanna respond?
To the football? Yeah, well, no, but I think it's very much, I mean, we're into the same kind of I think we see the same thing, but it's just that it's also a matter of having an experience of moving, social mobility, and the idea of understanding that the way that people in different positions with totally different resources and possibilities in everyday life, it's a different world, and we need to understand that. And I think this is something that in health promotion we we miss that. And then, yeah, it is a matter, I think this is a matter of collective lifestyles. This is what it is, pretty much what I'm trying to say as well.
If I can jump in, Jason, it's really interesting what you're mentioning, and I think I had the pleasure of going to probably an even more toxic place in the U.S. called Jackson Hole. Has anyone ever been to Jackson Hole? So this is a place, and this is interesting for Petra. This is a town in, help me, which state is Jackson Hole in? Wyoming, I think, which is purely based on lifestyle. So what you're explaining is very much a place that has defined itself by a collective lifestyle that is exclusionary. So Jackson Hole is known for housing people who are very, very high-end athletes, so Olympic athletes, and particularly those who do these incredibly dangerous kinds of sports. It's a very, very odd place. And I think it's a really dangerous idea that we should be organizing ourselves based on lifestyle. It's incredibly exclusionary. My response to you, Jason, would be, and this is really one of my own intellectual pet peeves that I keep trying to teach students, and I don't know why it's so difficult to get across, is that inequity research has to not just be about the poor. It's relational, as Petra told us. It's about the relationship between those who are excluded and those who are included. And that means that in all of our research, if we're interested in equity issues, it has to be about what those who have, the haves and the have-nots. So it has to very much be about what is in it for this group of people in Boulder who have created this exclusionary lifestyle. What is it about that is creating the problem, not about the excluded necessarily? So turning the lens on the power that those who have the power have, and these fights, as you called it, Petra, is so important, and not just focus, as we too frequently do in health promotion. There's a tendency to want to help the poor, which is, I'm not saying this is not important, but in order to help the poor, we also have to understand why those who have power maintain their power, and what it is that enabled them to get that power. So I don't know that that's exactly answering your non-question, Jason, but that would be my retort.
Oh, it is, and sorry, I know I'm using too much of my time. One way we tried to operationalize and then measure that was not looking at the social determinants of health of the population per se, but actually we measured an actual Gini coefficient of health inequality. So we took tons of domains of health and we looked at sort of what percentage of that top healthiest, how much health did they own, if you will, if you thought about that same notion of capital. And it was remarkable to see the distribution of health inequality that was above and beyond just class-based inequality. And still trying to tell a more detailed story about what are those places and how do they develop where there's incredible gaps between health ownership, if you will, and that's that form of toxicity that I was trying to get at. I needed to measure it in a way, and I don't know if that's in line with your thinking.
Yeah, I would say so. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great, thanks. I want to, Dita, you have a question?
Yes. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for some really nice presentations. And I have a question addressed to you, Kate. I was wondering how to best approach collective lifestyles and health promotion. I guess both structures and practices should be targeted, but yeah, I just wanted to hear if you could elaborate a bit on this.
Sure, broad question. Hi, Dita. So I'm trying to get Dita to come and join me in Montreal. So this is part of my plan. big, big question. I'll answer it in a bunch of different ways, and I'll draw a little bit on what Peter helped us understand today as well. So I do believe that, unfortunately, even with the Ottawa Charter in health promotion, we draw far too much on an individual lifestyle notion of health. And this is a massive disservice. So despite what we say in health promotion, that our goal is to enable people to be healthier, at the end of the day, we just want people to stop smoking, to eat better, to wear a condom, and to exercise. And we continually fall into this. So two of the things that I continually stress in my own work is behavior. I do not use the word behavior. I have dispelled the word behavior from my vocabulary, and I use the term social practices. Why? Well, partially because I'm a closet sociologist, but more importantly, because implicit to behavior is this notion that it's an individual practice. Whereas for me, the areas that I've worked in substantively, so smoking and now children's play, these are not individual behaviors only. They are social practices that we do as groups, that have meanings for groups, that have value for groups, or lack of value for groups, and it's not just about individual behavior. So I stress the importance of understanding what we do as a social practice in order to ground what otherwise we would call behavior in the social. And I think Peter really helped us understand that much better in terms of the context, the symbolism around practices, etc. Then in terms of the social structure, the other problem is that too frequently, and this goes back to my comment about the Black Report, is that we understood from the Black Report, and continue to also in health promotion, to separate the notion of the material basis and the material causes of health inequalities and the behavioral causes of health inequalities. So we think poor people behave less well and therefore are less healthy. Wealthy people behave well and therefore are healthier. And on the other side, some people say, well, actually, poor people have fewer resources and therefore are less healthy, and the opposite for the wealthy. And I say it's both. It's absolutely both. There is both a material aspect to the difference between the more fortunate and the less fortunate. And we also behave differently. We also have different practices. And these two things are very hard to tease apart. And in fact, I'm not sure it's really interesting to tease them apart. And so in fact, what Bourdieu did, this schematic that Peter showed us, helps to show that they're one and the same. They come together, that our position in society, what we do as a profession, etc., they shape our practices, and our practices shape who we are in our profession. So I'm hoping that answers your very large question.
I'm going to assume that the question was answered since Dita's microphone is off. Jimmy, you've got a question?
Yeah, so my question really actually is kind of odd in that it stems from a single word in Dr. Frohlich's presentation about observability. Like how observable the kind of individual components or practices or behaviors, whichever word we want to use there, of a lifestyle are. This stems from a recent back and forth with some commenters on some work we were doing that basically assumes that all of those components necessarily are observable. But I wonder, particularly given kind of the historical and theoretical kind of backgrounds you both just provided, it seems there's a lot of space for unobservable kind of practices within a health lifestyle that I would think we might want to spend some more time on than just assuming they're all observable. So the question is, how observable must the components be?
Okay, I'll broach that first and then hand it over to you, Peter. So thank you. That is a brilliant comment. Thank you very much. I think I put stress at that moment on observable because I come from public health. If we don't show the observables, we're nothing. And in fact, really, you can imagine I'm in an uncomfortable place in a school of public health because I'm too theoretical. So the minute I'm too theoretical, I lose credibility. So there is a need, and for health promotion, which is a practice-based field, remember? Or maybe you don't know, but it is. It's a practice-based field. We need to be able to show observables. Does that mean that everything is observable? No. How do you, or not necessarily. I shouldn't say no, but not necessarily. So how do we observe a norm? How do we observe a value? I think we can think about approximating this, and I tried to do this in my own dissertation work, but does that require us to necessarily measure it or give an actual empirical aspect to it? Not necessarily, but really the observable comes from those demands that come from my particular field. I'll hand it over to Peter.
Yeah, it's a very good question. What I think is most challenging actually is within the concept of habitus, because it's this sense of belonging in a situation or a context, or not belonging, and the sense of being pushed away is something that is you can't really, I don't know how to measure that or to get hold of it, but it's there. And I've experienced it, and I know that, well, I'm not going to, but my father did. I could see that, and I know that I've seen it so many times. When he visited me in my office in the university, which is a place that for him is, it's not for him. And I can feel it, I could see it, I could see his stress, but I don't know how to get hold of that, but there's something there. And that's why I think that this kind of analysis relating to habitus, basically based on resources, capitals that you have and have nots, and the situation you're in where you're expected to know things, you're expected to know how to behave, what to do, not what to do, what to say, not to say. And I think that is very important when it comes to trying to get people to move into new areas, to do new things. And people do that all the time. A lot of individuals do that, but still there is something there, and that's very hard to grasp. And there's been a lot of criticism towards Bourdieu's, a lot of things, but habitus not least, because it's such an unanalytical concept. It just moves around. But then again, I'm one of them who thinks it's important, and it does actually tell us something about ourselves and people in general and groups. The importance of positions and capitals in relation to different contexts that we move into, and trying to get people to become more healthy is like many ways to say to someone that you should try this. I'm very uncomfortable with people saying, let's take a break 5 minutes and stand up and move around. And if people watch me, I can't do that. So it's like this uncomfortableness that I think is very challenging and is a real problem in trying to push people into better health lifestyles. So yeah, I don't know if it's an answer, but for me that's the most critical part of this, and it's also the most critical thing when it comes to trying to capture, to operationalize or measure.
Yeah, just one quick comment is, I think the main distinction that I'm trying to think about is that lifestyles are definitely observable, and kind of because the groupness and identity and all the things you're talking about, but the question of like the kind of individual practices or individual behaviors that compose those lifestyles often I would assume don't necessarily have to be. And this becomes, I guess, in some respects, a measurement question more than it is like a theoretical question. But you could have, because of the like kind of group that you're talking about, kind of spanning between those, could very much involve behaviors that are kind of differentially public in those different groups that you're participating in, or different lifestyles that are shaping those. And so anyway, thank you though for both those responses.
Do we have other, I have questions I can always ask, but I want to give everybody a chance. Any other hands? We've got a little bit of, we've got about 15 minutes. Kyle, did you have a question?
Yeah, I sort of wanted to piggyback on what Jimmy said there. You know, one of the things I struggle with health lifestyles theory, Bourdieu, and the Habitus is, so we've got all these piles of resources that people can use. There are these chances or opportunities to use them, and the Habitus sort of helps us shape that, how we make those decisions. But we've also got these other things that affect us in life that are like, they're not capital, it's like they're anti-capital. Like I always think of something like trauma, right? So how does the experience of trauma play into the role of calculating how a lifestyle plays out? You know, because you can have lots and lots of resources, experience trauma in a way that, like we've said in here, fundamentally changes the way that you use that capital or convert that capital. And in the research that I do, I end up working with a lot of trauma, and we talked about the poor. And there is a structural component to that, but there's also a very intimate individual component to that, that I find theoretically I can understand, but sort of operationalizing those issues, it becomes a little bit fuzzy. And so I wanted to know if either of you had comments on, what about these things that are almost like capital vacuums in a way? Does that make sense? Okay.
Wow. I'm not quite sure what to say to that, actually. I mean, you're building on what Jimmy was just saying, obviously. I don't know anything about trauma or how you're defining trauma. I'm not quite sure how you're defining trauma. So if it were to be, say, a collective experience of living through a war, or that might be easier in a way to operationalize or to think through than what I think you're getting at, which is some of the trauma of being poor, which is not seen to be a collective experience, but is lived by the individual as trauma. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, or even not a collective experience, right? Individual sort of adverse experiences that jeopardize the way that we can utilize our capital.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, there is always a tension, and particularly in the kind of work that I've been doing, that the individual tends to disappear a little bit, right? So there's this room for agency, but even the agency I see as being shaped by a social experience. And so there is a concern in my own work, and I could definitely be criticized for evacuating the individual. It's just that my own entry point for the work is working against individual understandings of lifestyle. So there's a tension there in terms of at what point do you bring the individual back in? And so you, with your own work, could or maybe do argue that in order to really understand this experience, you do have to bring the individual back in. I can see lots of methodological ways of doing that by, through interviews and ethnographies. But there is, for me, in my own research, a tension there in giving too much space for the individual. So that's my really roundabout answer to you.
Thanks.
Dr. Court, did you want to add anything?
No, not really. No, it's a very good question again, I think. Yeah, and there's a lot of things that are complicated in relation to this kind of theorizing as well. But of course, a lot of individual experiences of difficulties and challenges will erode capitals and yeah, but no, I don't have much to add.
You know, can I just add something? I'm looking at the chat there. So I don't know if you Americans realize how very particular the situation is in your own country. That we don't think of trauma in the same way. We have our own racial issues, but they're quite different in terms of the level of trauma, aside from Indigenous people in my own country. What is in the chat from Sarah Bowen, I call that structure. I see that as structural violence, and it's lived by an individual, but I think it's extremely important for us to see this kind of violence and trauma as a structural attribute. It helps for me to understand that this is something that's mutable. It's something we've created, and therefore it's something we can get rid of. So it's not just up to the individual to figure out how to deal with the trauma. They can voice it, but if we understand it as something that we, those who are advantaged, are imposing on other people or have created to subjugate them, that's extremely important. So that would be my response to your question, Kyle. Thank you, Sarah.
Then maybe I could add something, and I don't know if it's relevant, but in Sweden, we've had a lot of migrants, coming from basically from the Syrian war. It started with that. And in Europe, there's a lot of migrants coming, did come, not much anymore, but we have a lot of people in Sweden who had traumas from real experience of war. But then it's also for them talked about sometimes a trauma in Sweden, because then what happens with your life, with your education that you did have and had a value where you came from, and it doesn't have any value in Sweden, and the people get stuck, unable to continue their lives. They wait for decisions from bureaucratic government authorities. And this is traumatizing that is going on in our country, actually. And it's on a collective scale, because there's a lot of people with the same experience coming in the same wave of migrants to our country that has this experience. And I met it among a lot of people, and it's terrible. It's perhaps the worst thing I could imagine, to like cut the life off and say, well, you have to wait. And maybe, but maybe not. You have to wait to see if your children might come or whatever. It's terrible. Yeah. And then the capitals that they brought, that they had, are just, they vanish quickly.
So I'm afraid we're a couple minutes past time. Just wanted to make sure everybody gets a little bit of a break. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we wrap up. First of all, thank you so much to both Peter and Kate. Those were really wonderful talks, super thought-provoking. I think we could talk for much longer if we had the time. So at 1 p.m. Eastern time, that's in about 25 minutes, is when the quote unquote roundtable research presentations will start. I pasted the information into the chat. And again, if anybody wants the agenda who didn't get it, just private chat me and I'll get it to you. So what you want to do is, if you're going to take off and take a little break, then just come back to this same Zoom link, and we're going to run them as breakout rooms. And so you'll have the opportunity to choose the 3 roundtables. We'll have the name of the roundtable, although not all the presenters. So make sure you know which roundtable you're wanting to go to, and you'll just be able to pick the roundtable and go to it. And if you want to pop back and forth between them, you should also be able to do that. And during the break, we're going to just have the Zoom session open so that people, if you have time, you have interest, you can be here, just chat about whatever. If we have a lot of people and it gets a little unwieldy, then we can just pop people into breakout rooms, kind of randomly selected for 10 or 15 minutes so you can meet some new folks. But no obligation to stick around, just we'll see you all back here in about 25 minutes. Thanks, everybody.